Hey guys, welcome back to the Overseers. My name's Proelios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing. We had a break the past week since the June Joust had just ended, and we took the time also to uh, just not do an episode and do other stuff that week. But yeah, we are back. We are going to start off with the Summer Showdown Qualifiers this weekend. And before we get into that, we just want to touch upon what happened in the June Joust, which is basically that the Shanghai Dragons took the trophy against the Dallas Fuel in an exciting 7 map series. And I want to get your thoughts on this, Nightwing. How do you think the series went?
I thought it was actually a really interesting matchup between the Dallas Fuel and the Shanghai Dragons, where I think most people were expecting probably Dallas to come on top, and certainly at the beginning of the series, it definitely seemed like that would be the case. But over time, I think Shanghai Dragons really just like fought tooth and nail for each map, even though sometimes it did feel like they were getting a bit rolled. Eventually, their ball comp did turn out to be successful. I think you saw Dallas crumble a little bit. They were getting spawn camped almost on uh, their attack on Eichenwald on the second point, where Fearless had to swap to the Hog, and I think that's where you saw Dallas really. It was kind of the beginning of the end for Dallas there, and I think huge props to Shanghai for making that comp work because I think many people, including myself, were like incredibly down on that comp because we thought the ball was just not getting that much value. But the kind of positional setups that they were able to make and the kind of executes they were able to do with that comp, I think, is what really helped Shanghai secure the W. So I think it was a really, really fun match. And I think this wasn't as a tournament as a whole as hype as the May Melee, just because probably some of those restrictions were felt. But even then, I think teams managed to make it quite exciting, and there was still a decent rotation between different comps. Even though that duplicates comp did seem dominant, I mean that's not the comp that actually won the tournament at the end. So interesting tournament, and I'm excited to see what's next.
Yeah, it was a rather exciting series even for me, even though I wasn't like particularly a fan of what Shanghai was running. But I think it was quite clever of Moon to sort of put together a composition that had some components that would work individually well against the Neogoths composition which Dallas was running. And they somehow meshed all of those components together and found a playstyle that was able to counter that composition really well. So how they generally went about it was that Fate on the Wrecking Ball, who played really really well by the way, he's really stepped up his Hammond gameplay, and he used to engage upon Dallas Fuel with a slam, and then Fleta would just swoop in, land some sticky bombs, and Lip would go in and try and clean someone up on the Reaper, and that setup just helped them get the first pick in so many different fights in on so many different maps and points. It was extremely amazing. Like it just goes to show how much practice the Shanghai Dragons had on all of the different maps that were in the map pool. Because realistically, Dallas could have picked any of those maps, and they would have had to find out, like, figure out the positioning. Because a comp with Ball Diva, like Echo, Reaper, Moira, Lucio, that's not something that you conventionally see. So huge props to them. Um, and yeah, I think we can start talking about some of the roster moves that happened this week, or like in the past 2 weeks. Um, and the first one is Shanghai Dragons signing Develop as a new hitscan DPS. Now, this doesn't come as a shocker because DM recently left the team. But it's interesting that they've chosen to pick up a rookie talent from Contenders. And a lot of people are seemingly quite high on him, like Wolf Schroeder, especially. He used to cast the Overwatch League, for those of you that didn't know. He seems extremely high on this player. And I mean, I haven't seen him play, but it looks to be a promising signing. What do you think, man?
So something I'd like to mention is this is another player that has also played on OZ Gaming, which is a team that we've been perpetually confused about. But you see that some of these players from that team have really seen success. Obviously, Develop did move on to, I believe it was Talon Esports after that. But and I've seen him play for Talon for a bit, and he's looked quite impressive. I think probably not like utterly shocking, like nothing groundbreaking, but he's consistent and he can play the hit scan as well as the tracer. So he's not just stuck on that hit scan role, unlike a player like DM. So, but he's quite good at those roles as well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they rotate him alongside the other DPS players on Shanghai. I think your default lineup still says Fleta and Lip, but maybe there's certain spots where you would prefer to put Develop in. I think that's something the team will only find out by experimenting. And also with hitscan as a role, I think you sometimes want that additional hitscan player to be in just because like hitscan aim can be streaky at times where projectile is sometimes more consistent. So like you can have a great day or you can have a terrible day. I think one of my favorite players, Birdring, is like the prime example of that. So yeah, I think it's a good pickup. He's definitely a talented player, and I'm just interested to see how Shanghai can really put him in.
Yeah, I think it's quite it's going to be a matter of whether Moon values just having like an additional hit scan specialist on the field over Fleta's flexibility, because Fleta also plays a really good hit scan. So it maybe developers put in on like he gets some playtime against some of the weaker teams, at least in this season, just because of that synergy that Fleta has with the team. But maybe this is like a good long-term signing, right? Because you can just retain him again next year if he shows promise, and then he can like be fielded instead of Lip if in case Lip retires or is transferred to another team. So it's a good signing. Like you should always ideally have a backup hit scan player. So yeah, I think we can move on to the next set of roster moves, which are by the Chengdu Hunters. So they've dropped one of the flex DPS, Kaneki, and have signed Taro Koki, who was actually a hitscan player. So rather than signed, I would say he's been promoted from Team Chaser, which is their academy team. So what do you think of the signing, Nightwing? I think I'll let you go first.
So for Taro Cookie, I mean, first of all, let me just say, we were a little bit confused, I think, about what Kaneki's role on the team would be for the Chengdu Hunters. And honestly, I thought he played like fine in the match that he actually had to play. Like I thought he might have even played better than Jinmu, to be honest with you. I think he was looking a little more flexible than Jinmu. But I guess Chengdu want to keep their silly hero specialist. That's part of their identity. And so Kaneki has kind of got the boot there. But Tarukuki comes in. I'm not entirely sure what to think about Tarukuki, honestly, because he's not a player that has had a lot of success. That said, honestly, the only time I actually remember watching Tarukuki was in one of those 2020 show matches where there were two teams. There was a team Rui and there was a team Creed. Creed being an assistant coach for the Chengdu Hunters. So Team Creed had actually got Tarukuki on DPS alongside, I believe it was Leave and some other Chinese players on the other roles. And then Rui was also keeping some Chinese players on his team. So honestly, that's the only time I've really watched him. So, but it's going to be interesting to see if he can actually do anything on the Owl stage. I think it's fine for the Hunters to kind of put in that hitscan player, because I think if you run into something like a Tracer Rash meta or some sort of comp like that, then you can have Leaf playing one of those roles and Tarukuki can play the other. But apart from that, apart from a theoretical standpoint of what the player plays, I don't really know what to think.
Yeah, so I haven't like watched Taro Cookie playing, like or rather observed him. So I don't know what caliber of a player he would be, but his track record with Team Chaser has been fairly good. And plus, if he knows these two coaches from before, then it just helps him slot into sort of the coaching setup that the Hunters have got. Um, but I do think that Kaneki as a flex DPS player was criminally underutilized. I was fairly high on him going into um, this season because of how well he played alongside Guangbong on Team Cat. But like, I mean, dropping him maybe makes sense. Like if they especially wanted to promote Taro Cookie because he was their least used DPS player. The fact that they've got someone like Leave as a stable damage dealer is really good for them because he can pop off with not much effort on both hitscan and projectile heroes. He's been doing an exceptional job at both those roles this season. So I mean, I think they just really wanted to sign Taro Cookie because of his like quality of its can play. But once again, they've got Jimmy, who's like kind of like a sniper specialist for them on certain maps, and they've also got Leave, who's a remarkable hit scan player. So this is a confusing signing for me. But yeah, we'll see how things go for the Hunters with this new pickup.
I think with Jimmy, excuse me, with Jimmy, I think he's looked little bit streaky to me as well, in the sense that sometimes you'll see him pop off on like very specific situations where the team is able to rally around him on the Widowmaker. But at other times, Jimmy's kind of lost almost at times. So I think maybe Tarkuki provides like a different dimension of hit scan almost to them, where maybe they are able to find a different play style. Because honestly, like even though some people are a little bit high on Jimmy, I think he's still quite streaky and not really a consistent bedrock for the team to really develop upon. Leave, though, I agree, is incredibly consistent and he's a very high performing player. I think he's almost too good for Chengdu, if I'm being honest with you. Um, but yeah, we'll have to see how this player really turns out.
Yeah. Now moving over to the NA region. Um, The San Francisco Shock recently announced that they have dropped Agape as an assistant coach. Now, Agape was like the head coach of the London Spitfire when they won the first season of the Overwatch League. And it's a little bit surprising that he's been dropped because it really seemed like Agape and Krusty teaming up, like two coaches, the only two head coaches that have won the Overwatch League, teaming up for the three-peat. It's not really encouraging to see that, like, not that's not going to happen now. So um, we can only speculate why he was dropped. I was joking with some of these guys the other day, saying that maybe he was the one who said let's put Violet on DPS. But I mean that there has to be more than that. Like maybe he's just made some weird coaching decisions which has caused the Shock to underperform. Because under Krusty's leadership, like the Shock haven't looked so shaky, right? I'm not going to say they're completely inconsistent, but they haven't been as dominant as they were in the past two seasons. So maybe Agape's like decision making was the reason behind it. But yeah, I mean, it's just something we can only speculate about. Any thoughts on this, Nightwing?
So, in terms of the coaching stuff for the Shock, I think there has been over the years kind of a brain drain over time where coaches from the Shock have gone to the other teams, especially Jungpuck in recent history going over to the Houston Outlaws. And you've seen that because of that, other teams are really stepping up. They've picked up that amazing rush style that was clinically executed by the Shock, probably helped a lot by coaches like Jungpuck, right? Similarly, I think with Agape, the issue has probably been that uh, the coaching for the Shock has kind of looked all over the place here. I think this year Shock have looked a lot less solid, and maybe some of it has to do with some just coaching disagreements, or just like some issues in the system. I think because I think you can see that like rotations for the Shock are not quite as concise as they used to be, and players are just having a harder time playing that macro game. I think they're still individually very talented, but sometimes the Shock are just losing out on that macro difference, especially against teams like Dallas, where you would see that because Dallas were able to rally around, for example, in that duplicates meta a lot better around Fielder, he would almost always have 20 to 30% ult charge earlier than Violet would, which I think is not just up to Violet's
Violet?
ability as a Moira player, but it's also about how the Shock choose to receive damage and build ult charge. So things like that, I think, are looking rough for the Shock this year. Maybe Agape had to do with some of that. I know that recently, I believe Casaurus has joined the Shock, like in person, who is their
Yeah.
assistant coach. He was originally, I think, helping them online. So I
Mhm.
mean, they still got some coaches to bolster their ranks. But yeah, interesting change for the Shock. I'm not sure what consequences it will entail, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Just speaking of coaching staff changes, the London Spitfire recently signed Spilo as an assistant coach. And like Spilo is like someone with a pretty good presence on YouTube actually. I mean, he's not. I forget the name of his channel, but he's not. If you just search for Spyro Overwatch, you'll find his channel. But yeah, he's been grinding it out as a coach in Contenders for a while. So it's really nice to see him being brought into the Overwatch League and joining the London Spitfire, who coincidentally have got Sparker fully into their lineup now since he's turned 18. So, like, really interesting to see how Spilo and Sparker are going to influence London's rather unimpressive trajectory. So, yeah, any thoughts on this signing? Nightwing mod check?
All right, sorry. Uh, so Spilo comes in most recently from ex Oblivione in Contenders, which is a quite decently competitive team. Honestly, they've had some great success with players like Fuki, for example. Um, Spilo is one of those uh, coaches that has been in the Contenders region, like tier for quite a while, and I think it's only fair that he gets his shot in the Overwatch League, even if it is on a team like the London Spitfire. I think some of this new just way of thinking coming in with a new coach, as well as Sparker finally turning 18, hybrid being brought down to Contenders, should spell some changes for the London Spitfire, which I think is better than staying with the status quo, which is not really working out very well for them. So I'm excited to see if London can really make a turnaround, because currently they're looking like a team that could just be one of the few winless teams this season, potentially alongside possibly the Titans and Valiant. Though I think London and the Titans have a match upcoming in these Summer Showdown qualifiers, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So it's not like both of them can go winless. Uh, but I don't know. I think it's just good to see some level of competition maybe coming in from the London Spitfire, considering they have been struggling quite hard.
Hmm. And also, just like a quick side note on one more change, which is like the Guangzhou Chargers signed Sungwoo as their new head coach. So he used to actually coach the Charge in like at the beginning of season 3, if I'm not wrong. Then he went to the Valiant, and now he's back with the Charge. We don't really have much to comment about him, so we just wanted to mention it as a side note. And also, like the Contenders team, Runaway, like probably the most famous Korean Contenders team, has disbanded. We are just really bummed about that because a lot of Overwatch League players came from Runaway. But yeah, that's just one more thing we want to acknowledge. Should we then talk about some of our predictions, Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean, let's go ahead. Uh, I would just like to mention that once again that it's a shame to see the Runaway brand go, but also the people behind it uh, just kind of taking a seat back, because many of these players were kind of had quite a personal connection, as far as I can tell, with both Runner and Flower, where the org and the people running that org were really able to um, kind of make these players come together and perform really well time and time again. So there's definitely some magic that was kind of going on uh, behind the scenes there. It's a shame that at least under the banner of Runaway we won't be able to see that for now. So that's a shame. But yeah, we can get into the predictions.
Yeah. So there are just like two matches that we want to talk about because those are the only two matches for which we disagree on the winners. So the first one is the match between the LA Gladiators and the San Francisco Shock. Now I think the Gladiators are going to take it 3-1 and Nightwing thinks Shock are going to take it 3-2. So do you want to go first on this one or should I?
You can go ahead.
All right. So I think as of late, the Shock have just been looking more and more vulnerable. Although, yes, they did have like a really impressive showing against the Dallas Fuel in the June Joust qualifiers. I still think the Gladiators are a more consistent team. And like even though on any given day both of these teams could have like similar peak levels, I just think the Gladiators are more likely to have a good showing. And on top of that, they've also got Kevster now, and we've finally seen his face after so many months of waiting anxiously to see how this guy looked. So I think him being in NA is going to help because naturally he gets much lower latency. So that's only going to be a boon to them. And Shock losing out on Agape, I don't know if that's going to make it easier for them to follow just one structure or if that makes some aspects of their gameplay a little more challenging. We'll have to wait and watch. But because of this kind of like addition of Kevster in person to the Glads and the Shock's like release of Agape, and of course the Gladiators looking more consistent overall, I think they are going to take the series. What are your points of view on this?
Okay, so while I totally buy the face diff theory that Kevster is just going to face diff them by by being on lower ping, having his face seen. Uh, my my way of thinking about this is just that uh, now that the hero pools are not in effect, we are probably either going to go back to the kind of dive meta that the Dallas Fuel were successful with, or a kind of rush meta that was played at the beginning of the season, right? I think the Shock looked better in both of those compared to the Gladiators. I think the Gladiators looked quite strong in that previous hero pool. However, in a Winston based comp, I would put Murph over Muse any day. And Shock did only lose to really Houston and Dallas, which were probably the most competitive teams in that original meta. So, with that in mind, I would probably put Shock over the Gladiators. I think Birdring can definitely make strikers sweat a little bit on that Tracer. Now that Tracer's back in the pool. That said, I think even then Striker still has the advantage. I think Sombra based comps, now the Sombra is back in the pool. The Gladiators seem to suddenly just drop their spaghetti all over the place when Birdring has to play that Sombra. I think he's just not that comfortable or that well practiced on it, honestly. I think his EMPs are off and he's not really that effective. Where I think the Shock will still be able to pull that off a little bit better. I think definitely based off of how this past month has gone, there is definitely an argument to be made for the Gladiators to be able to take this match. And that's why I've put it as a 3-2 win for the Shock and not just, some kind of stomp. I think it will be a close and very fun match to watch. But I would personally, based off of what metas the Shock have been successful in the past in this season so far, I'd put the Shock over the Gladiators.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I think even though in like the May Melee tournament, I would agree that the Shock played better Overwatch, but the Gladiators still were pretty good. So even I think it's going to be close. Like even though I've said 3-1, it could very well be a 3-2. So yeah, I think we are on similar pages, just like with slightly different opinions on the situation. Anyway, let's move on to the second and final prediction we are going to discuss, which is the match between the Spark and the Dynasty. So I've predicted straight up a 3-0 sweep for the Spark. Nightwing has predicted a 3-2 win for the Dynasty. I think you take this one first, Nightwing.
Okay, so I think just based off of how disappointed people get in the Dynasty, this is going to be the hotter of the two takes here. Even though producers putting it across as a 3-0, I think why I would like to go for the Dynasty here is just because I think if it comes down to that rush comp, then I mean that dive comp, then Dynasty have what it takes to close it out. Even though Gushe has an incredibly strong Winston, so does Gesture, and I mean Prophet's Tracer is also great. They're going to do especially great on that Sombra Tracer comp, where Fitz can also play Sombra, a hero which he is quite decently proficient at, even though he's not quite at the very top. When you think of maybe players like Hisu. That said, I think it's definitely a little bit of a hot take. I think I'm just believing in the Dynasty for this one. I don't think any of the DPS on the Spark are necessarily as proficient on the Tracer as on the Dynasty. So that's one plus point for them. I think if it comes down to the rush comp, I'm still not confident, honestly, that Gusho and the rest of the team are going to be that proficient on the rush. So if it comes down to that rush comp, I think it's almost anyone's game. But I would slightly favor the Dynasty in a dive comp, despite how strong Gusho is on that Winston. Echo has been nerfed, so I think she will be slightly less impactful. That said, if Echo does get played, I think I definitely give that to the Spark. So it's going to be a close match in my eyes, but I think the Dynasty clutches is out. It could very well be a win for the Spark, but I don't think it will be a sweep.
Yeah, I mean, actually, all very fair points. So I do think that the Dynasty are like they are a good team. I don't think they are like they are definitely not a Valiant. They are definitely not a Charge. But where they lack is their consistency. I think as of late, the Spark have been looking really consistent. Obviously, barring that the upset win of the Excelsior over them during the homestand. Really sad, by the way. But I think overall the Spark have just impressed me more after they integrated Shy into the roster as like a starting player. I don't think Godsby was quite doing it for them. Like having Shy in there not only give them additional sort of like a high level of hit scan play, but also give them a really solid echo player. So I don't think we've seen the Spark and the Dynasty clash like in a fairly long time, but like even if you compare their performances during the qualifiers, I think the Spark took the cake because like they beat most of their opponents, including the Shanghai Dragons, which was quite impressive. And the Shanghai Dragons weren't playing badly necessarily, but the Spark still managed to beat them. And like even though like the Dynasty do benefit from Tracer and Sombra being added back to the meta, I think the Spark have also shown fairly good versatility on the tank front. Like Gushua has been playing consistently. He's not doing a bad job at all. Bernard has been a stable off-tank presence. I think MCD is looking really, really good on the flex support, arguably better than creative. and just like we know that the Seoul Dynasty have a really awkward tank situation where they sometimes just ignore the fact that they have an off tank player and put in Gesture and Marvel. And I'm not convinced that those tank rotations are really going to benefit them, considering that the opposing team likely has a really stable tank line, which I think Nightwing would also agree is usually way better than having rotating tanks, because that changes like the whole line of communication, the whole sort of comm structure, and it can really change the way in which you approach any given map. Um, so rather than me having a lot of faith in the Hangzhou Spark, I'm just a little bit shaky on the Dynasty because I really think they need to put up more consistent performances for me to really rate them as like a team at par with the Spark. Like, I don't know if it's actually going to be a trio, but I've been really impressed with the Spark as of late. So that's the score I've put up.
So here's an interesting stat for you. I mean, uh, it's obviously not a very convincing argument, but it's something to note. I was looking back at the schedule and the scores that the teams have received. Dynasty have not lost a single match to any team apart from the Shanghai Dragons since week one. Only in week one they lost one match to the Philly Fusion, and that was a fairly close match in my eyes. Apart from that, they've just not lost to anyone except the Shanghai Dragons. So, I mean, you could just put that uh, put that off as like strength of schedule, but like even then, maybe that's my line of thinking coming back from uh, why I think the Dynasty can actually win this is because I haven't really seen them lose to like most other teams. So I don't really know how I really feel about them losing to the Spark. So I think it'll definitely be an interesting match.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, I know you're saying yours is the hotter of the takes, but I think a sweep for the Spark is also like slightly hot. I don't know. But yeah, we'll have to wait and watch again. Because, like, usually these predictions during the first week of any qualify series are always difficult because you never know what the meta is going to be like, and you don't know which players are going to be starting on which maps. So I mean, it'll get easier from here on. That's all we can really say. So, any finishing thoughts before we round off this episode?
I think it's just going to be really interesting to see what uh, again the reformation of the meta. I think some teams are going to come out with some comp in the beginning, and then over time, again you see people refine and come up with some new stuff in the beginning. I think something that's really great about this season is that in the 3 weeks of qualifiers, every team is guaranteed that one of those weeks they will have an off, which gives them some time to scrim, some time to relax, and develop some new comps that can actually counter the quote unquote meta comp at the time. So I think that's what made that's what has made this season kind of a lot more influx. You saw that in the beginning of the melee qualifiers, you saw that rush comp, and then eventually Dallas overcame that with their own dive comp. This second tournament, you saw that Dupligotes comp be dominant, and then Shanghai come and win it with the ball comp instead of the Winston. So I think it's just really going to be interesting to see how that meta forms once again in these next 3 weeks. And it's going to be interesting to see if there can actually be any upsets, because there have been some crazy upsets so far. So maybe some of our other predictions that we haven't even talked about yet, maybe they'll just kind of fall flat. And some other teams can actually, show their stuff. Especially, I'm interested in seeing which team out of the Titans, Valiant, and London Spitfire can stop being winless the first. It's the race to the first win, which I'm also interested to see as like a side arc of out of the anime that is the Overwatch League.
Hmm. I think it could possibly be the Vancouver Titans because I think they are the least worst of the three teams. But yeah, just a hunch. yeah, then I think we can round this episode off. Thanks again for watching, guys. Do all of the YouTube stuff. Do comment down what you think of our the predictions we discussed. That's Gladiators versus Shock and Spark versus Dynasty. And yeah, we will see you next week. Bye bye, guys.